I would say, sometimes people ask me the question, like, what have you learned over, all these years of working with kids? And really, I think one of my biggest takeaways is that pretty much adults need exactly what kids need. Every time I teach children's programming, every time I teach a training, every time I teach a workshop on how to share yoga and mindfulness with kids, what I get from the adults all the time is, oh God, this is exactly what I need. And that's oftentimes because we didn't get those things as a kid, and we're still trying to, put those pieces together for ourselves.
That was Jennifer Harper. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Seeker and Sage. Danni Pomplun here, and I am your host. Today's episode 155. Jennifer Harper is on the show, and we are tossing out a very big buzzword. Drumroll, trauma. Yeah, we've all got it, especially myself. Listen, I'm no one to be shy about, my trauma and my story and all of that. And so I think it's important to have these conversations on the show first. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you go by Jen or Jennifer?
Usually Jen. Jen works.
Jen, okay. You know what? We're gonna go to Jen then.
Excellent.
How are you? I know we were kind of just catching up before, as I do with most people. I have to remind myself to not get excited and start babbling a ton beforehand, because then it takes away from all the yummy stuff that we're going to say on the show. But how's it going? I know we were talking about mom life just a second ago.
Yeah, it's going. I mean, everything's pretty much fine, but we're living in a pandemic and my kids don't have school. We actually pulled out of our remote school option a couple of months ago and just went full on homeschool. So, I'm running a business and homeschooling my kids. So things are very full, but I really can't complain. Everyone's healthy and that's the most important thing.
So you're really bored with a lot of free time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. COVID life is super boring for me. I like see people being bored, but to be honest, I can't remember a time in 15 years that I've been bored. I have my oldest daughter's 8. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old and, all sorts of other family things. But I also started my own business like 16 years ago. And, there's never really been much space for boredom ever since then. There's always something to do. And usually that something is pretty interesting and compelling and creative. So I'm lucky. It's not just like I'm not bored because I'm so busy. It's also like life's pretty interesting.
And it's pretty cool. I mean, what we get to do, and you in a different capacity. I work obviously with more adults than I ever do kids, although I do kid stuff sometimes. Haven't in a while, but I definitely do. But I would say, I mean, for my experience of the work that we get to do is pretty incredible.
It really is. It's great, especially right now when things are so hard in the world. It's been very helpful to feel useful. It's something that's really helped me get through a lot of the last year, almost a year of this very strange time we're living through, is just feeling like I can actually do something that's helpful. It's been kind of a lifeline.
I think about, I've said this a lot on the show. I've talked so much about this and just about mental health and all the things. I've really, the whole pandemic situation and because of the way it has changed life has for me, it actually dropped a big layer of boundary, I guess, where I'm a bit more real and a bit more raw. Not that I wasn't before, but there's just this other, like, look, we're all going through it and we're all starting to see the human. And I think that's what we really need, is to see the human. And I think a lot about adults, whatever those are. I think a lot about adults struggling through, pandemic and through pandemic life and, my own personal struggles with it. And, I see my friends and, I start to see how the healers have a hard time holding space. When therapists are saying they're not taking on more clients or that they need to take breaks because it's getting intense. And we're supposed to be the ones that have like somewhat of the emotional intelligence to, deal with adulting, I guess, per se, And I haven't really experienced, I am child free, and I don't really have a ton of kids in my life all the time, except when I visit my sister or a couple of friends, but like, what are the kids going through right now?
Yeah, it's really challenging. And the kids are going through a lot of what we're going through, in the sense that so much of what's predictable for them has been stripped away. And it's funny you talk about therapists being overwhelmed, and the adults struggling with the adulting. Being an adult doesn't make us any less susceptible to like the basic operations of a nervous system. And if the nervous system and the human brain are so overwhelmed with input, that that the brain can't keep up with the processing, then there's overwhelm. And one of the things that helps us one of the things that helps our nervous system not get so overwhelmed is these sort of touch points of routine and predictability. The more we can predict, the more we have our routines, the easier it is for the mind to get through the day. And the more we can kind of use our mental strength to focus on the things that really need to be focused on. Right now, so little is predictable. Things change so fast. So many routines have changed that the mind needs to work on all that stuff and doesn't have those like resting points. And for kids, this is really magnified with all of the changes to their school life. But the thing is, parents and caregivers can do a lot to mitigate that. Like as adults, we're absorbing everything, and we have to set our own boundaries. Where do we build our routines? How do we limit our news media? In what ways do we stay informed, but also, be able to regulate our capacity to take in information? Like there's all these choices we make as adults that impact how we process all this change, and fear and information. For kids, their experiences are radically different from each other depending on how their grown-ups are doing. So the grown-ups in the situation have a huge capacity to put boundaries around children's experiences right now in ways that can be helpful. But also, of course, the harder of a time you're having as an adult, the more challenging it is to sort of create that safer space for the kids in your life.
So can you give me like, I get you and I follow, and I'd love to hear like an example, like something that a parent can do, to help really set that boundary on the experience, given, the time where, given where we're at in the world.
Yeah, so it's such a good question. And it's, of course, varies so much because families are so different, and caregivers have such different responsibilities and challenges themselves. But I think one of the things that can be really helpful for kids right now is looking at basically two factors. And, I talk up a lot and teach a lot on anxiety in my work. And one of the core understandings about anxiety that I've come to, over these years with children especially, is that there are two things that really magnify anxiety. And one is overstimulation and the other is disconnection. And I was mentioning earlier, this kind of like routine and predictability. And I find that with kids, a lack of routines leads to overstimulation really quickly. So, for my kids, my own children and my clients, when anxiety is rising, when kids are getting overwhelmed, I'm always asking, how do I reduce stimulation and how do I increase connection? And in the immediate short term, the reducing stimulation might be things like, seeing where you can turn down the volume on life. Maybe it's a little less tech, a little bit of contained spaces. My kids really benefit from small spaces. It sounds funny, but we have a room in our house where we just took the door off a closet and made it like a little cozy corner. And when the kids are in there, there's less even visual stimulation because they're in a small space. So the nervous system can take a break. It doesn't have to take in so much input, and adding touchstones of routine. And I think sometimes parents and caregivers get overwhelmed with the idea of routine when kids are home from school and there's so many, they get kind of stuck on like, okay, do we need to be in a rigid routine every day? I don't think so. I find my kids really benefit from simple things like every Monday night we have a pizza Monday. And it's just one of those things that kind of like every Monday night, the world feels normal. We do the exact same thing. Like my husband makes pizza. We sit in front of the TV and we watch a kids cooking show, Top Chef Junior or something like that. And it happens every week, and it's a reset for them. And it's a reminder that there are some things that are solid, and it lets them rest in it a bit. And I find if we miss Pizza Monday, it's like the entire family is a little out of whack until the next one. So it doesn't have to be this really complicated routine. It can just be like these things that provide anchor points in their week. And the more those things can help them connect with their important grown-ups, the better. So if those touch points of routine are also opportunities to connect, that's really important. I think when we think about connecting in terms of reducing kids' overwhelm and anxiety, sometimes we focus too much on talking with our kids, but our kids really need opportunities to connect where they don't need to like explain themselves. They don't even need to understand what's going on for themselves. They just need to feel like they're not in it alone. So finding ways to connect without a lot of talking is really important.
Pizza really does solve everything, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm lucky. I get homemade pizza every Monday, so I don't know. I guess it depends on the pizza.
I'm like, yeah, me too. I put it in the oven from the frozen section. That's homemade. It's not delivered. Like, a lot of what you say, I think about, like my own personal experience with even having a cozy corner. I was in a small studio apartment for most of this pandemic. That was like 425 square feet. I actually felt like I was going insane because I was having to live, work, eat, sleep, like everything in this small little 12 by 12 room with, a detached bathroom and a detached mini kitchen. It was too small. But in my newer space, I have, an area downstairs where, I sit and where I do my podcast at, and then I can practice and I can do yoga downstairs. And then my upstairs, kind of little nook that is my resting area where it's completely different. It's a sanctuary. Laptops aren't allowed up there. The phone, is only allowed up there until an hour before bed. And then I go and I plug it in away from the area. So that it's a very, like you said, it's a very cozy nook where, my nervous system does get to decompress. Coming from someone that does have generalized anxiety disorder, which I think a lot of us probably have a decent amount of or we do now anyway. We definitely do now. It is a great way to just, like you said, it is a great way to turn all of that stimulus off and to, disconnect, especially as an adult who runs a business online. Who is always, having a ding or an email or a ping or a message or a this or a that, or you respond and there's you know what I mean? There's just like that endless cycle of notifications and, having to, it's funny. You would think, online, like, well, where do you have to be, but there's so many calls and meetings. It's a little too much.
It's where your mind has to be, right? It's where your mind has to be. And every time you get more input through your senses, your mind loses the opportunity to sort of integrate the information that it's already received. And if we don't have that integration time, then we get overwhelmed and anxious because the protective part of our brain doesn't really know if we're safe or not. We're always, that protective part of the brain is always using our senses to gather information, mostly to answer that question, am I safe? And if the information is coming at us so quickly that we can't really integrate it and make sense of it, then we can never really let our guard down.
Yeah. Yeah, let's get a little more into your work specifically.
Sure.
Yeah, let's. So I know a lot of it is obviously with children, and you've created Little Flower Yoga, and I'm sure you can kind of speak to that a little bit more. But a lot of this, what people don't understand, maybe we can connect the dots there. Some of the stuff that we go through as adults is because of childhood anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I would say, sometimes people ask me the question, like, what have you learned over, all these years of working with kids? And really, I think one of my biggest takeaways is that pretty much adults need exactly what kids need.
Mm.
And, every time I teach children's programming, every time I teach a training, every time I teach a workshop on how to share yoga and mindfulness with kids, what I get from the adults all the time is, oh God, this is exactly what I need. And
Mm.
that's oftentimes because we didn't get those things as a kid, and we're still
Right.
trying to, put those pieces together for ourselves. And there are things that we need to feel as a kid in order to be attuned to, in order to, let me see, there are things that are optimal to get as a child that help us most fully feel free to be ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kids, their sense of safety is largely dependent on how the grownups around them see them. So, if they don't feel seen, if they don't feel affirmed and attuned to in their relationships with their most important grownups, safety sort of dictates that they figure out how to make the grownups like them more, how to make the
Mm-hmm.
grownups see them, right? So when we spend our childhood doing that, it kind of takes away our capacity to really get to know ourselves. And we do that as a kid for safety, but then what gets sacrificed often is our authenticity. And as a grown up, we kind of feel that, but sometimes we don't know it in our minds until we start getting access to practices like yoga and mindfulness, and getting access to therapy, and really working that out. But I find even when we don't intellectually know it, so many of us are needing the same things that would have helped us in childhood to just be our most full version of ourselves.
What are some of the things that when parents are saying to you, yeah, wow, I wish I could have used that too. What are what are the top 3 things that you hear when you start to share about your work?
Oh my gosh. Well, the first thing I think that comes to my mind is the acceptance of emotion without trying to fix or change the situation. This
Mm.
comes up day after day, and it's been interesting during the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, most of my work with adults has been with educators and mental health care providers and training them to work with kids. Now, during the pandemic, I've had so many more opportunities to work directly with parents. And this came from educators and clinicians, but from parents, it's like tenfold magnified, is just this sort of longing to be able to have our own feelings, especially the trickier ones, in the presence of another person without having to manage that other person's discomfort, without
Mm.
having to kind of be on guard. Am I being too upset? Is it making this person uncomfortable, or are they trying to change it? And then if I act this way, they'll think I'm not listening to them. There's all these things that happen when we have big feelings in front of another person that have nothing to do with us, right? And have everything to do with like how we're trying to regulate the interaction with the other person. And that's something that I really focus on in my work with kids, and in my work with caregivers, is like, how can we as adults regulate ourselves and our own nervous system and our own emotional state enough to actually be able to be present to a child's uncomfortable emotions without getting all sorts of caught up in them.
Right.
And parents just are like, oh my God, like I still need that. I never had that. I never had that, and then the other things, I mean, that's the biggest. And I almost feel like everything else grows off of that.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah.
And I can give other examples and other thoughts, but at the core of it is like, can I be myself in the presence of another person and trust that that person is okay with my messiness?
And that requires that level of awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
It requires that level of like tuning. That's like some
Mm-hmm.
serious ninja emotional intelligence.
Well, that's why
I had,
people say that parenting is like the greatest mindfulness journey, the greatest spiritual journey you'll ever go on, right? Because kids just like bring out every single bit of whatever's inside you, so they provoke every emotion. They provoke every emotion. They test every boundary. They do things that remind you of your own childhood. I mean, they push the button on every trigger you've got, so if you are committed to a sort of intentional, aware, mindful approach to parenting, where you're really interested in doing that work of self-reflection, it can get overwhelming kind of quick because, you've got this sort of like constant spiritual teacher, like running around in your house, testing you at every moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, like something that I've learned recently as an adult, there's this difference between discernment and judgment, right? Where one of them is like coming from a place of not authenticity, and let's get really clear. Like, we're not meaning the word like, can you just be like really authentic and da-da-da, but truly like when you're acting from a place of self versus a place of like reaction or, not being present, I guess is a great way to say it. Right.
Yeah.
But I had this conflict recently where I was asking someone to do something and they weren't understanding what I was having them do. And so I was like, well, no, like try it this way. And they didn't understand it still. Yeah. And then they came back defensively and they're like, okay, Sergeant, I'm trying to do it this way. And I kept pushing for like, no, like I'm asking you to do it this way. I'm asking you to do it this way. And finally we like got, through the communication and like the thing ended up happening. And the observation was, oh, wait a minute, from a friend who is super ninja in emotional intelligence, I call him, but pausing that situation and being like, oh, wait, I see that you are confused and let's address the confusion first and how that's going and how that's feeling and where you're at with that. Okay, cool. Yeah. Once we've addressed that, now we can move forward with where is the confusion and what part of my communication isn't working and where can we get it to a place where it can work?
Yeah. It's so important, like that sort of capacity to stop and backtrack. Like when you're in those situations, whether it's with a kid or another adult, when everybody's emotions start getting bigger and people start acting, like you're saying, defensive or, challenging in a way that like makes it clear, like somebody doesn't feel safe here, like that sort of whenever I always think like whenever there's this block to our capacity to communicate, this sort of, inability to show up like fully and hear each other, it's usually because someone or both people are trying to keep themselves safe. And if you feel like you have to try to keep yourself safe, it kind of takes away the possibility for true connection. And that should really be the goal of communication, right? So it's always important. And it comes up especially in work with kids and especially kids who've experienced trauma, which so many have, is like if you get to an impasse or things seem edgy, that reminder of like somebody in this situation is trying to stay safe.
Right.
Can diffuse a lot of the judgment, and then you can step back and unwind it.
I feel like I need to pay you for our session today because I feel like I'm getting so much. I'm having this moment of like, oh shit.
See, all the grown-ups need the same thing.
Well, that's the end of our episode. We'll talk to you later. I gotta go. Bye. No, but Jen, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's just so fundamental. Like the things that kids need are the things that adults need, especially when we're in those moments of like, I don't feel seen, I don't feel safe, I don't feel like I belong in this situation. We go right back to the way we felt as kids.
Okay, so I have another question for you here. Like, I think about. I had a really hard time for a while with this there's a shift in language in the way that we're moving forward as a society. I think there's a lot of talk of more safe space and what that actually means, and holding the container and the capacity and trauma and so on and so forth. And I had a really hard time with it. I actually pushed it away because I felt like it was sometimes it can almost, for me, this is my experience. So I wanted to say that this is my experience. It doesn't have to be anybody else's. You don't have to agree with it. I'm all right. What it felt like at times was like this giant woke battle. Does that make sense? Like it was like,
yeah, I understand.
So many people had this language, and it was almost weaponized. Like if you didn't understand it, then you weren't, I just didn't feel safe. It didn't feel safe that I didn't understand it. It didn't feel safe that I didn't get it. It didn't feel safe that the way that it was brought up for me in my experience of it wasn't an actual like intellect, like, hey, let's introduce you to this stuff because this is where we're moving, but more so like, you don't understand this. How? Yeah. Does that make sense? And so it really,
I mean, my experience is completely different. But I think my experience was probably more unusual than yours. I think your experience is really common, and it's important that we understand it as a society and also as a field, or we're not going to be able to move forward in connection. It's going to be everybody feeling, judged and running away.
100%. And that's what it felt like. It wasn't until, afterwards where I actually had another friend who we got in a conversation, and this friend was very much like, are you okay? Like, do you feel all right now? And I was like, yeah. And he just picked up and he's like, okay, so this, my observation is this could be a little defensive, which tells me like, are you confused? And I said, yeah, actually, I just don't get this. Yeah. And he's so like, it just, 2 hours later down the rabbit hole, I got to understand the language of safe and, everything. And I got it. And I actually felt like a better human because of it. Like, oh my God, these are things that I'd been feeling for so long, or, that I was trying to get to, and I didn't have the language or the understanding. And now that I did, it was like, it blew my mind when I got there in that 2-hour conversation. And it also made so much like it course corrected so many, I guess let's yoga this. It course corrected some of the samskaras, some of the thought patterns that I just kept, digging that groove deeper and deeper. I could feel course correcting because I had the understanding of the language. That makes sense?
It definitely does. And I think it's really important, that for people to be able to recognize that and really sort of dig into making sense of an experience like that, because guaranteed it's going to happen again, right? So like for you, I don't know what your background is or where you're at in teaching and the way that you work with trauma. Like I don't know any of that, but knowing how the world goes, right? Things are going to keep evolving. And as a community, we keep learning more, and almost inevitably language changes and evolves. And we realize ways that we've been contributing to doing harm that we weren't aware of, even if we've already become aware of like 20 ways and worked on it. And, like there's still more, right? So like every time we have an experience like you're talking about and can sort of remind our mind that discomfort probably means you're feeling judged or uncomfortable and unhappy and less confident. Like every time you can feel those emotions and let it be a reminder, oh, this means there might be something to learn here. This means there might be something I don't understand. And I want to get curious about that, right? If we can allow discomfort to prompt curiosity instead of defensiveness, then we don't have to like be that little kid on the outside of the cool club, and I think that feeling is so like, it's so deep in so many people because we don't live in a culture that really affirms children, like as a collective, right? There's a lot of variation in that, but the structures of our society, like the structures of schooling and testing and like the foundational structures of our culture and our society don't actually embrace and affirm children's like full humanity most of the time. So collectively, right, many of us really are so deeply yearning for belonging that feeling excluded because of what we don't know like sends us fleeing to some other group of people that will take us in and understand us. And that's really, really hard on a healing field, on a field and a community that's working towards acceptance and non-judgment and connection. I mean, to me, yoga, the entire goal of my work is deeper connection with oneself and others. And anything that sends us running away from each other, gets in the way of that. At the same time, we live in a society and a structure where like the experience you had, sometimes people who've experienced certain types of traumas, like in order to be heard, you have to make people so deeply uncomfortable that they actually have a reason to listen. And it's a paradox because it can push people away, but at the same time, it's so frustrating in so many cases that these injuries, these harms that have been done have been so overlooked. And perpetuated in spaces that are supposed to be welcoming healing spaces, that it almost is impossible to be soft and subtle about it, right? Because it's not taken seriously. So, for me, my experience was so different. The first place I ever taught yoga was in a domestic violence shelter. First place.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So,
you went there.
Yeah, I mean, my entire trajectory. I mean, because for me, I didn't come to yoga and say I want to teach yoga and then go out and find. I was already working with children and with with folks who'd experienced trauma. I came to yoga because I was looking for ways to help myself and people I was working with and connected with heal in a way that was embodied, right? Because trauma is such an embodied experience. And, when you talk about creating a safer space and helping people find safety, one of the first things that I think about is like a sense of safety in one's own body. Because for so many people, sensation in the body is in and of itself frightening on a gut level, on a core like nervous system level. So I kind of came to yoga through the people I was already working with, not the other way around. So for me, that those sorts of considerations were always at the forefront. And then I got very, very fortunate early on in my work to I was a founding member of the Yoga Service Council and very, very involved with that organization for more than a decade. So I really grew up fully embedded in sort of the most provocative questioning environment around this intersection of these historic practices and these healing practices intersecting with social justice concerns and with the medical and mental health professions, like all of that intersecting. That's where I lived for like the entire first decade of my career.
Yeah, you were totally in the work.
But one of the things at the Yoga Service Council that we really took to heart and tried to do in our conferences over the years and in all of the work that we did and put forward in the world was trying to create learning environments and conversation environments that were not exclusionary and really didn't to create the type of experience you're talking about where somebody who, wants to understand feels unwelcome. But it's, we had many situations arise where people did feel extremely challenged and provoked. The kicker, the key is not to let go at that moment, right? To stay
totally
with it, and commit to moving forward even from that really, defensive situation.
Something so cool and simple, and I want to share this and talk a little bit about this. But you you wrote a children's book, and I think it should be an adult's book.
Yeah, I've written a few, and that's kind of some of the feedback I get.
I know a few people, myself, that could really benefit from your children's book. It's totally an adult book, you guys. It should be. But you wrote a book called Thank You Mind, Understanding My Big Feelings on Tricky Days.
Yep. I'm really proud of it.
You should be. I mean, it's first off, it's adorable and it's super cute. So great job. But I mean, you're literally speaking to all of our inner child and to the children that are out there. Tell us about the book. And, I know this is a combination of, it's really everything that we just got to, in this conversation, but written as a book for children.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this is my second children's book, and I have some other books for adults and some card decks. And, but I wrote I wrote a book called Thank You Body, Thank You Heart last year that was really a gratitude-based body scan for kids. And I wanted to put a practice in a book. And I mentioned I have two daughters, a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old. And, the things that stick for kids often are rooted in the things that become rituals, and books that they love get read over and over and over again. So I was really thinking about, how can I speak directly to kids in a way that will embed in them, that will stick. And so the idea of writing children's books was, very natural for me. And then I was asking myself, okay, what are the books I actually like to read to my kids that aren't going to drive me crazy? And, I realized I really like to read rhyming books. And also when books rhyme, kids remember them. So right, I started writing these books all in this rhyming cadence. And they're really meant to be practices in a book. And Thank You Mind came about because I noticed really my own kids, especially my older daughter, speaking so harshly to herself. And, many of the kids that I work with and the families that I'm connected with, it's just shocking when you slow down and watch and listen to realize how hard kids are on themselves. And, we all have this inner voice that can be a friend or can be a critic. But so many of the adults in their lives, I think, have these strong inner critics that's just what the kids are picking up on. And the book was really meant to counter that. So it goes sort of step by step through examples of all different emotions, difficult ones and positive ones. So I look at anger and jealousy and grief, but also excitement and awe and joy, and looks at how we can use our inner voice and things like self-talk and self-compassion and acceptance and reframing, perspective taking to really be a better friend to ourselves, and experience all our emotions as just human information. And it's a very simple book, but it's got these very strong reminders about how we can be with different types of emotions in ways that really build our resilience, build our self-compassion and self-acceptance, and also allow us to have these really deep dives into joyfulness, that remind us of ways to slow down and kind of take in the good and, allow our brain, our mind, our body to feel awe and joy and excitement fully and not rush past it. So that's where the book came from. And, when I wrote the dedication of the book, and I don't remember it word for word, I'm going to mess it up, but when I dedicated the book, I wanted to write a dedication that was for kids and adults. And, the idea in the dedication was that the book was written for any kid who ever felt like they had to make their feelings smaller. And for every grown-up still working to be a good friend to themselves.
I think, you hit the nail right on the head. It's something that, it speaks to me a lot is, how do we be our own best friend for a bit? How do we
Mhm.
hold that space? And I use the reference a lot of like, it's your best friend and they're calling you and they need you. And how do you show up? And for me, it's like, it's attention, it's kindness, it's compassion, it's fierce, right? If they're slipping
Mhm.
up, I'm going to make sure that I call them on that, a
Yeah.
call in versus a call out. I think it's so important, because I think sometimes, as adults, this is just my sense on it. Not that we forget, but we get so caught up in adulting. We get caught up
Mhm.
in the job, we get caught up in the house, we get caught up in this, and this, that we forget to maintain some of the most important stuff. And sometimes all the adulting can be a distraction from the maintenance of that inner child, from that inner self. And I really do see, in my eyes, the world is changing a lot. The conversations that are being held are a lot different than they were before. The conversations in yoga are being held
Mhm.
a lot different. And so I just think that this work that you're offering is not only for kids, but this is something that adults, have a really beautiful opportunity to check in and nurture themselves with.
Yeah, thank you. And it's points, what you're saying really, it points to and reminds us like the work that I do is often for kids, but there is no separating the fact that the best thing we can do for our kids, whether it's as caregivers, as educators, as mental health care providers, coaches, right? The best thing we can do is give them good examples of aware, compassionate, loving kindness. And, how we treat ourselves is how kids think people are supposed to treat themselves. So when
Right.
we talk about doing this work to help kids, it's just confusing if we tell them, do this for yourself, but then they see us not doing that for ourselves. So being consistent in our teaching means finding ways to model self-compassion. And, it's not just about self-esteem and I'm great. Like it's almost like compassionate accountability. How
Right.
can I be that loving friend to myself? How can I treat myself kindly? How can I speak kindly to myself? But also, how can I keep my curiosity about my own challenges? How can I remember the context and my own perspective and keep learning? And how can I hold myself lovingly accountable when I mess up? When I make mistakes, when I hurt people. And I think a lot of us are stuck in this place where we either get really down on ourselves when we make a mistake or mess up or hurt someone. We really like berate ourselves, or we get super defensive and kind of, just move away from the situation completely. And both of those are really teaching kids the opposite of what we're going for. But if that's how we treat ourselves, that's how we're teaching them to treat themselves.
So important. I think a lot about just having these conversations in general, and how, the more that we get to have these conversations and air these conversations, maybe it might give one or a second or a third person permission to do the same with them in their circle. And I think it's beautiful. It's brilliant, and I think it should be a required book for everyone before you get before
Aw.
you get a driver's license or anything. You got to read this book.
It rhymes, so we could make people memorize it and repeat
Totally, totally. Before you take a teacher training, it is the Bhagavad Gita is the second required reading to this.
it. Aw. Yeah, we've got a lot of capacity to make sense of our own experiences, but it's
Yeah,
very hard to do that when we're really overwhelmed and when we're taking in so much and not giving ourselves any spaces
yeah.
for settling and reflecting. The reflection piece is so important, like reflection on the situation. But when we're like a million miles an hour, go go go, we never have the opportunity to reflect, and that's when people get stuck.
I feel it. Jen, thank you for one, creating this space to educate us and to, help us understand a little more about emotions and how they work. Not only, I know the work is for kids, but literally this is the best, I know most adults I know are going to benefit from this conversation. So thank you for creating the container for us to have this conversation and to educate this on us and to really empower more people to go there. And I just appreciate all of your work and everything that you're doing, and your bright light in the world. That's important. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Those are really kind words, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Until the next Seeker and Sage, this is Danni and Jen saying peace out.